everybody. This is ICM801 International Communication webinar. We have a very, very special guest today, Helen Diabanza Peterson, who's an alumni. I'm already giving that secret away, and at this point, a diplomat. And we have also another very special guest star. Some of you who might know him already, some of you will get to know him very well in this program, Dr. Basilio Monteiro, the director of the ICM program and the mastermind behind the International Institute, and so many other things that you will enjoy during your studies in the program. But to start with, Helen, if I may, tell us a little bit about your career. You have a very, very diverse career path. How did you become a diplomat, and where are you right now, and what are you doing right now?
Okay, thank you so much for having me. I am very honored to be here and to have this discussion and conversation with you, Dr. Mina and Dr. Monteiro. So for me, it's hard to say where it started because I feel like it almost started when I was born. I was born in Sweden, and my dad is a Congolese, and we moved to Congo very early. And then I lived part-time in Sweden, part-time in Congo. So I got to know very early about the organization where I work today, which is SIDA, which is like equivalent to the American USAID. So that has always been there, and living in a developing country has also made me interest, that was what sparked my interest in developing questions and global development, and and of course communication has also always been there, because being mixed, I switched between Sweden and Congo, which is two completely different worlds, very easily actually. While my mother was always Swedish, regardless of if she was in Congo or not, and my dad was always Congolese, regardless of if he was in Sweden, I was Swedish in Sweden, Congolese in Congo. And I think that is what has shaped my interest in where I am today. And I have a great advantage, I think, of that background. So that is a little about how it all started. And then in high school, or after high school, when it was time to decide a career path, I really wanted to work for SIDA, for this organization, the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, or another international organization. It didn't have to be SIDA, but SIDA was my option, like my ultimate goal. But any other international organization was also interesting. The thing that I made, maybe that I wouldn't recommend other students, is that I did not talk to anyone that worked for SIDA, or that I did not take contact with the HR or ask, what do I need in terms of education to be part of this organization. So that is really an advice I would like to give. If you know where you want to be or in which organization, try to find someone or an alumni, or go directly to the HR department and look for what skills are needed. For me, I just figured that maybe finance, if I do some economic, that is always good. And if I mix that with languages, that should be a good match, I thought. Today, I would definitely have done the international communication, because that is a great, great foundation for this type of work. But I didn't know that by then. So I started my career in business. I did a bachelor in business administration. I added some French. I went to France as an exchange student, which is also another fantastic experience that I would recommend for students. But then after that, it was a bit difficult to get a job. And I ended up taking a job at the police authority in Sweden, at the financial department. But it was a great move, actually, because that opened, that was my door into the government world. And that has really been fantastic for my career. So I'm very happy for that. And I just have to say now, because since we are talking about, and I know that the students will soon be out in the world, in the real world, when you're looking for a job, try not to be too picky. Because for me, I thought that I wasn't even going to apply for the job, because it was a short temporary work for 2.5 months. And it was way below my level that I thought. It was as an economic administrator. But a friend of mine said, just apply, and you never know. And I am so happy for that today. It turned out to be a job that it was extended all the time. Apparently, eventually I got a permanent position. And of course, it also I also upgraded to to match my level of education. So I had 6 fantastic years at the police, and after that I moved on to another Swedish organization, still within the finance area, which was not exactly what I had thought from the beginning, because I wanted this international angle, but it was still a very, very great job, and I had really good years.
So you had this very successful career in finance in Sweden, and I understand then you got to work for the international aid organization, or the Swedish aid organization as well. But what made you decide to continue your studies, and why did you choose St. John's?
Yes, so so while I was at the police, I got married to a man who is a police officer and lawyer, and he worked with national policing and democratic policing. So with him, I started to travel and kind of got this international angle through him. And we went to Uganda, where I stayed for 2 years. And in Uganda, I had the opportunity to actually work a little, do some consultancy work for the Embassy of Sweden. So that was my first, let's say, feeling of the SIDA organization. So, and I liked it so much, and I really, really wanted to work there. So I asked, what can I do? And they said, well, first of all, you need to be within the organization, which I wasn't. So when I went back to Sweden, that was my goal. And when there was the position and opening, I applied. Someone told me about it. And this is another good thing. When you tell people about your goals, it's much easier for people also to contact you when there is openings. So for me, everybody I knew basically knew that I wanted to work for SIDA. So it was a colleague, a former colleague, who called me and said, Helen, there is a position now, you should apply. And I did. And then I got it. And 3 years later, my husband got another position now in New York. And so I followed him to New York. And yeah, and then I took leave, because in Sweden, when you work for the government, it's very easy to take leave if you or your spouse is working for a multi-international organization like UN or EU or something. So I came to New York. I took a break for 2.5 years and just was a housewife and spouse and took care of the children. We have 2 children. But then I wanted to pursue my master's because I didn't finish my master's when I was younger, which was fine then, but now I saw an opportunity to really do that. So I talked to a friend who knew some things about St. John's, and she said that St. John's is a really good university. You should try there. And it was also geographically very convenient for us because we lived in Queens by then. And I looked at the program, this international communication program, and immediately I fell in love, and I was like, this is so me. And then I had a conversation with Dr. Monteiro, our first conversation, and Dr. Monteiro said, there is a lot of reading. You have to read 5 to 6 books each week. I thought he was joking, but he was not. So, but it was fantastic, and that's how I started to study international communication. And it was also a way for me to try something else, to sort of try a new field, which was maybe more in line with my interests to begin with. So I'm very grateful for that.
And where are you now?
Yes. So a couple of years later, and I think I will come in more into what I have taken with me from my studies later. But then I got this other opportunity to apply for this position at the University of Sweden in Kampala, which was the job that I wanted 10 years earlier. And I took it. And a bit more than a half year ago, we came here to Uganda. And now I'm working at the embassy as a controller with the title of First Secretary. And it's with Development Cooperation. So and having the international communication is such a fantastic platform for me.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm sure this is very inspiring to everybody who's seen the video. There are so many different strands that we could go, but can I start with something? And I would love to hear from Dr. Monteiro too. You started talking about how when you've been in different countries, you change your identity, and how did that feel? How did it feel to feel Congolese and Swedish, and how do you feel now? Who are you now? Or does national identity matter? And I would love to ask Dr. Monteiro the very same, because you are similarly a completely cosmopolitan being. So what is the role of national identity to us today in this globalized world? Helen, maybe you go first, and then Dr. Monteiro.
Yes. So for me, up till the age of 10, I really literally switched. When I was in Sweden, I was Swedish. When I was in Congo, I was Congolese. Even if in Congo, I was still Swedish in the sense that I lived in a nicer house, maybe because my mother was a missionary, and we had a little better financially and socioeconomically than my friends, but I spoke like them. I had the same interests as them, so that was that. But then when I was 10, I started in a Swedish boarding school in another country, also called Congo Brazzaville. And that's when my mentality or mindset started to be maybe more towards the Swedish part. I could still switch in terms of language, but maybe I started to be more Swedish in the way I was thinking and in my approach to the world. Even though Sweden-Congo was there for a very, very long time. But today, I would say that I have more of a Swedish mindset, but my heart is definitely still Congolese also.
So, Dr. Monteiro, you are another cosmopolitan, and perhaps the most cosmopolitan person I know. Can you tell a little bit about your background for those of us who don't know so much about it yet? And how do you identify yourself? What is your national identity, or does national identity even matter anymore in these globalized times?
Yeah. Thank you so much for asking that question, because it's a very timely question for me, because given our whole public discourse on identity politics, I've been doing a lot of reading, talking to my colleagues who are much more knowledgeable about this, and learning from them, seeing how it plays out in the political realm, and also how it impacts societal structures as well. So um, now, yes, I see myself as cosmopolitan. And I was born in India. I in a small part of India called Goa, which was colonized by Portugal for 450 years, and one of the longest held colony, I think, in the colonial history. So anyway, so I speak Portuguese. I went to Portuguese educational system, and uh, very much appreciated that academic culture. Then when Goa became part of India, when it was taken over by the Indian government and it joined India, then I became Indian. so then I had no choice but become Indian and be Indian citizen. So kind of a shift there from Portuguese citizenship to Indian citizenship. But of course, then afterwards you study the larger culture, become part of the larger culture, learn the language, Hindi, out of kind of necessity for living in the country, so now part of the country, and then traveled around the country as well quite a bit, and studied outside Goa in my college studies, and in the heart of India, in fact, in a city called Nagpur, and and then the trajectory of life is such that I came to the United States to pursue my studies, and I ended up in New York. It's not by preference, but just so happened that some connections were here, and they kind of said, okay, this is where to go, and then I'm here. So I studied here in the United States, and a few years later, I got my American citizenship and lived here. But because I am also was born as a Portuguese citizen, the Portuguese government says, you are eligible to reacquire your original Portuguese citizenship. So I said, why not? So I said, I did that. I have a Portuguese citizenship, which now makes me also the European citizen as well. So I kind of, so I have this real cosmopolitan experience. So I do have in India issues you something called OCI, Overseas Citizen of India, which gives you all the rights except to vote and hold agricultural land. Otherwise, you can go there, live there, and work there, everything else. So I go to European Union, and I travel around there, and have no problem. And then also as American citizen. So now you ask a very interesting question at the end. He says, how do you see yourself? I must tell you honestly, and this is my honest to goodness answer. I see myself as a human being. What has helped me to go through this identity stuff, nationality stuff, ethnicity stuff, is just peripheral, it's ephemeral. And I say, I've come to a conclusion, why don't we introduce ourselves, instead of saying, I'm an Indian, say, I'm a person, I'm a human being, I mean, those are kind of differentiations we make. Yes, they have functional purpose, I understand that. But at the same time, I think today than ever before, we need to talk more about our common humanity than the color of our skin. And the more we talk about common humanity, I think the more we'll start seeing each other as human beings, then based on appearances and color of the skin or whatever it may be. And so I'm a big proponent of discovering and promoting humanity rather than our identities, So just to give you a little nutshell of my world of understanding cosmopolitan. I do speak about 4 languages, and understand, I speak 4 different languages fluently, but I can manage can survive at least two or three other languages as well. So.
Very interesting. I think you two are so very similar in that respect. And you both brought about the issue of language. Helen, you said you spoke like your Congolese friends in Congo and so on and so forth. Also, Basilia, you talked about language, Dr. Monteiro. At the same time, you also talked about education as something that shapes your identity very much. But in international communication and in the theories, we talk about this week. There's been very long this kind of a theory that mass media, especially, or media in general, perpetuates national identities. And still, when we take a look at media today, they are very different, let's say, from Sweden to India to Portugal to Uganda to the United States. The media structures are very different. Access to communication is very different. The kind of cultural content is very different. And at the same time, people have for now 20 years said, well, but the internet will unite us. So what do you see the role of the media being in terms of how we see the world and whom we identify with? And again, my question is, does national context still matter in terms of the media? Helen, do you want to start? A big question.
It's a big question. I think I would like to hear Dr. Monteiro first this time, actually.
Yes, thanks, Helen, for putting me on the spot there. But anyway, yes, I do have some thoughts about that because I think about these issues and read about these issues as well for my own education, ongoing education. Let me go back to points that Professor Horowitz made about language. Why languages? In order to understand people, you have to understand their language. Language is the way you understand the mind of the person, the heart of the person. And if you don't understand the language of the place, people may speak English, this is the globalized language now, but you really don't understand the person. To understand the person, because we are as much as we talk about globalization, internationalization, we are grounded in a particular geographical location. And the geography where we are born, where we grew up, that particular context shapes us, our worldview. How do we understanding of reality itself is shaped by that particular context. And then we may move ourselves from one place to another place, but we carry that cultural context. And yes, some of us, I say, fortunately for a variety of reasons, because of my education, whatever it is, I'm able to accommodate myself in another place as well and try to understand. And because I make that effort to understand the language, that's the first thing I do. Any country I go, I always learn the basic greetings and basic languages that not because they don't speak English or anything of that sort, simply because I want to understand them. I want to know when they say something, and through the way they speak, the words they use, the words are a door for me to understand their soul, understand how they are. And I always think, we say, people do different things in different places. And when we go, particularly Americans, when they go to those places, oh, look, they're so weird. They do some weird things there. And I even when I take my students to travel with me, I said, listen, there's nothing weird. You always ask the question, why they do what they do. And if you keep asking the question, why they do what they do, you'll find a terrific answer. And it says, wow, it makes sense. Now, and it makes sense there because in the cultural context. So language is very important. Now, I forgot your other question was.
I asked the role of the media, because in international communication, Benedict Anderson creating the national culture through mass media, does it still hold?
Yes. See, one of the things with the problem with the media is this. Media is like, you cannot do without it, and you have to suffer it, but it is there and we need it. See, media, because of the modern communication technologies, media technologies, what has happened has given this amplification. So, we use the term local and global, kind of put it together, become global. And so what the media has done has amplified the voices of the local small place and presented to the larger world. Now, what happens in the process is the larger world doesn't understand the context of this particular news or this particular story, simply because they don't have the cultural context to understand what is going on there. And so it is read and misunderstood by the larger society when you put on the national stage, when you put on the global stage, that particular story. So media, on one side, it's fantastic. It tells the world what something happens in the periphery. But the bigger world doesn't understand the culture of the periphery, the context of the periphery. And so, it is, let me give you one example. It's not a perfect example, but a little better example. BBC, over the years, had made an effort to pay attention to this. If you go back about 15 some years ago, BBC, their reporters were all British. They came and they went to all the parts of the world and they reported. They were helicopter reporters, they come, they jump, and they have a story, and they glamorize the story, and the word is always very exotic stories, When they go to Africa, they go to Latin America, they go to Asian countries, they focus on the exotic dimension of it. And the whole world was looking, oh, you think of India, they think of elephants, as if nothing else is happening there. You go to, they think of Africa, they say, oh, some kind of big animals, as if nothing else is happening. So, but now, in the last 20 years or so, the BBC has intentionally cultivated local reporters, of course, following the standards of BBC news reporting, but they're people who understand the local culture. And that is a terrific effort on their part to make this happen. So, so media gives us a distorted understanding of the world today than ever before, because today everybody is a publisher because we have those devices in our hand. And then so everybody is a publisher, everybody is a writer, everybody tells us. Now, and then that story travels around the world. You don't know who is reading it. And it's read in totally understood, totally different, and many times in a way that it should not be understood. And of course, sometimes it is also maliciously put it out as well, just to create some problem. And this is the media world today, which has become a double-edged sword. It's a wonderful thing, but at the same time, it is not so good thing, It's like, so, and that is where we have to be careful. We have to be more educated. We have to be media literate. And I think media literacy has to become part of our primary education, elementary education, secondary education, not just at the college level, getting a degree or something like that. It has to become media literacy, the way we know to read and write, and arithmetic. Also, that media literacy also has to become part of our, basic education.
Helen, this is an interesting segue. Actually, remember we had a little conversation about today's conversation beforehand, and you gave an excellent example, Helen, in terms of political communication and media literacy, what you had observed. We talked about differences between, let's say, Sweden and Uganda. Can you tell us the example again?
Yes, so I have been thinking about how the media is here in Uganda, also a little comparing to the US, where I've recently lived for 5 years, and also Sweden. And I really find it so interesting what Dr. Monteiro said about geography and languages and how important this is, because what I've found here in Uganda is that because of the different tribes and the media is so different, it kind of follows the people. So the diversity of the people is also the diversity of the media. So, and also the coverage is very local. So for example, here in Kampala, where it's more, you have more of the intellectual elite, the coverage would be more, maybe a little more critical towards government, and because of just this issue that Dr. Monteiro raised, because of the education. They are more educated, they are more aware of what is happening around the world. And to me, it was interesting also to see that the way the media is here, and also the way this education situation is a little similar right now to how the US has become, let's say. Because you have Kampala here, like you have New York in the US, where you hear these voices that maybe are a bit more informed about what is going on and how things are actually connected, while out in the rural area or out in other parts of the country, people are very, you know, it's what they are doing that is important. It's their lives here and there. It's not maybe the whole global context. So for them, it's important to have food, to have shelter, somewhere to live, and then safety. And if they believe that the government is stable and that's the best option, that's how also they will maybe vote and maybe choose. So and I found that very interesting, because you have this education versus non-education or non-general education, the middle literacy that Dr. Monteiro talked about. And you also have urbanization versus rural. And so I found that a bit interesting. And also here in Uganda, the media is very market driven, which is also similar to the US. And another thing that I found interesting was that in Uganda, you have two main newspapers. You have New Vision and Daily Monitor. New Vision is partly government, and Daily Monitor is completely private. And New Vision is a newspaper that will tend to be a little less critical to the government, and also maybe not go so deep into if there is like a scandal or a corruption case that has connections with the government or something like that. They will be more careful in how they frame that story, while Daily Monitor is more direct, critical, maybe go much deeper into these details, who did what and when and how. And for me, that was also a little, I thought it was a little like right now, as the situation is in the US right now, with, for example, Fox News and CNN, for example. So I found that interesting. But then when I see Sweden, it's a whole different story. Sweden is very different in terms of media, because in Sweden you have the public service, and even the private media channels or broadcasting are still very homogeneous, like the public media. It's very fact-based, and now I'm talking about mainly the news channel, not so much the tabloids, but it's more, they really seek to find the truth, the facts, and it's really a big issue in Sweden. Like if you don't tell the truth in your story, or there is a lot of mistakes, it will definitely, you will have to apologize and post another article about those mistakes. But the thing in Sweden is that everything is through the Swedish lens. So, so for example, it's very selective, even though they try to be kind of objective. Of course, it can be biased and stuff there also, but what was I thinking? Yeah, so it's a bit selective. That's maybe the thing, that they may choose to focus on Swedish news, on European news. Of course, the American news are always big in Sweden also, while Africa, Asia, other countries can be a bit more remotely. And sometimes they only have like maybe one of a very few reporters in the whole continent covering the whole Africa. So that is something that I thought about.
And I think that's an increasing trend in small countries, just because the news business is challenged right now in the digital age, where the whole subscription model and advertising model is different, and advertising is going to online platforms, social media networks, and so on and so forth. But Dr. Monteiro, you had a comment.
Yeah, I mean, you in a way you touched on it, because I wanted to comment on the business model of media is problematic. And the moment we have made media as a commodity, as a transaction to be bought and sold, and made profit of it, I think that has become the destruction of the service of that media has to provide, or should provide to the society. Now, it is not so much a service to society to tell to people what's going on, but more of a profit-making utility, and that's how it is. So, and that's why, and also another part of that is also politicization. So of media. Media has become tools in the hand of the politicians or the political parties to promote certain ideology, to promote certain way of thinking, certain agenda, and so this relationship between media, business, and politics, I think, requires a lot of scrutiny, and I don't know if there is a way to come out of it, but that is how we, part of that also is we don't want to pay to receive that. So we're expecting something cheaper or something free. So of course the reporters have to get their salaries, they have to get paid and whatever. Somewhere an income has to come. But if they rely on the corporate model of income, advertising or something, then of course we basically tell them, you do whatever you want, and you will just consume whatever you give to us, So, and that's where I think lies a little dilemma, conundrum, I should say.
Absolutely, and in many ways, not only in terms of news, but also how to counter big global networks that are commercially based, and because of that causing so many problems. Helen and Dr. Monteiro, Basilio, I would like to ask both of you yet another question, because we have talked so much about globalization and how media has made the world a global village, as Marshall McLuhan would say. Helen, do you see signs of globalization in these countries that you know so well, Sweden, the US, and Uganda, even Congo and France? Do you see signs of global culture or sort of shared culture that would be similar to all of
them? Well, in Europe now, unfortunately, the trend has been to be more national. So it's kind of divided. You have one part that is very, very globalized, that really are in line with the UN and the Sustainable Development Goals, and making the world a better place, more united, environment cautious. And then you have this other part that are leaning more and more, I would say, towards the national closeness, to close the borders and not let other people in, and preserve the traditional values, or the traditional those things that they find important to keep, which is maybe important, but in a way that is not goes against the globalization completely and goes against also human rights perspective, I would say. So that's Europe, and I think with the US it's a bit similar. I will leave the US maybe more to you and Dr. Monteiro. When it comes to Africa, Uganda, for example, here it's very important with globalization. They need globalization because they need to, in order to develop and to come closer to countries that has another socioeconomical level, you have to be open and you have to have many allies and trades. And so here I feel like it's more open, and people in general welcome international and globalization, I would say.
Well, if I were to comment on that question, is the globalization, when it has a different understanding, the French has a total different word for that, and the way they understand that, if you speak in French, they understand in globalization is not the same way when you use the English word for that. So it's interesting. That's why language is very important to understand the window to the culture of the place. Now, the homogenization of culture is tied to the industrialization, industrial globalization. And it became a principle of efficiency. So okay, goods made here, we can sell them everywhere if they only buy into that particular values, and this is okay. And so television originally, and then social media subsequently, became a vehicle of kind of promoting homogenized culture, and through that pushed through all these goods, consumption, to consume. So it's okay. They are eating this in United States, must be good, so we can eat this in African in Uganda as well. And I think this pandemic particularly has compelled us to revisit the way the socialization, the financial, the way the globalization was going on, the financial globalization, industrial globalization. All those things I think are on the table to be revisited, and must be revisited, because what we are looking at is the value of the local culture. We are talking so much of sustainability. If we were talking of sustainability, globalization is not the way to go. We need, yes, there is a certain level of globalization is necessary, certain type of globalization necessary, but to kind of homogenize the local culture and say, okay, this is how we do in America, therefore this is how you should do here. That I think has become problematic. And this pandemic is kind of compelling local residents to ask questions. How can I live off my land instead of relying on the global supply chain? Now the global supply chain is disrupted, and I am hungry, and why should I depend on the food, on my salad, to come 3,000 miles away? So what can I grow in my own backyard? And you can see that movement, that trend is picking up, particularly in the young educated group of people, population. And I think that's a wonderful sign that we cannot ignore, we cannot dismiss globalization, but we have to find ways of accommodating it. And but at the same time, valuing regional, local, particularly regional culture, supply chain, developing regional supply chains, regional cultures as well. So the interdependency is a reality. We are one Earth, one planet, and so it is one planet. Affects me here. What is the pollution taking place in India? So we are interdependent, but at the same time, there is an element where we have to find ways of balancing the local culture as well for our own sustainability. So those are my little comment on that. So.
Thank you. You both made me think about the fact that we've sort of come from globalization is fantastic and exciting, and then globalization is extremely bad and dangerous, to kind of the middle crowd. There is interdependency, and there are positives and negatives. And And positives in the ICM801 class, we've talked a lot about Netflix and how Netflix has brought global audiovisual culture to us in a wonderful way, in a sense, and even supported audiovisual cultures in countries that perhaps don't have as much resources to finance productions, and so on and so forth. Also, Helen, what you said about, in good and bad, I suppose, the fact that Halloween and Valentine's Day are now global events. And I just learned from Helen yesterday that even Thanksgiving is becoming a global thing. And yes, indeed, I looked at the Finnish newspaper today, and one of the grocery store chains was advertising pumpkin pie, turkey. I could not believe it. But so I would say, if I may, evermore, because of this mixture of global, local, and our necessity to understand where the interdependencies are, and what even we should know about, is a very important reason for us to study international communication. It is not only good, it is not only bad, it affects us all, but to what extent? And that's why I would like to finish this session to bring it back to our education, the ICM program. Helen, I would like to hear first your reflections of what did you learn, and what are your sort of main takeaways and advice for the students in the program?
Thank you. Yeah, so for me, ISM was really such a very fantastic opportunity to both learn about the world. So I think my takeaways is the biggest takeaway is, I think, the way I see the world now, because like this is exactly what we have been talking about. It's not only black and white. It's not only globalization is not completely perfect. There is complications with that, and there is also good things. And the same thing with being more local has also great advantages. At the same time, as you also, it's also good to learn from each other and take what is working for them. Maybe that can work also for me here. And that there, I hope that Africa and developing countries can actually influence the developed world more, so that we can take the good things and the things that works very well in these countries and also apply them to the Western world or developing countries. But so I take with me those things. I take with me, of course, it's so much, it's so much, except for the fantastic classes, lectures, brilliant professors that I have been honored to stay with for 2 years. Also the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. I learned a lot about that within my studies. And also the way of seeing the world, that nowadays you may have to start thinking about also creating your own work, your own work opportunities, because the way we have been living and the way we have been working, like for example, my work in government, it may not be like that forever. The digitalization is spreading even in developing countries, and that will change the whole world. And also now with the pandemic, that was very obvious that we can do a lot from home, for example, and that makes many jobs disappear. All of a sudden, jobs that were dependent on being at one place, all of a sudden they're not so needed anymore. So I think this is also a big thing that I have taken with me, that I knew it when I started my position here, and I have it with me all the time, that we need to be more sustainable. just this thing that Dr. Monteiro talked about, that maybe I can grow my own things. Even if you have a good job, you don't know for how long, because things can change so fast. So that is another thing, but there are so many things, and now I'm a little, but yeah, I think those things. And
Thank
also,
you.
yeah, sorry, I just wanted to say that also for my work, in my work, all the lectures I have had about governance policies that we took in your classes, Dr. Mina, and the political development and economical development discussions, all those are so useful for me today in my work, and it makes my work much easier when I read articles or when I read documents or project proposals, and also in communicating with partners, with organizations. I feel like I have a very solid platform to stand on, even though my work is a lot finance, but it's still in a totally global development setting. And I take that with me. And I hope that my work will also lead me more into communication, because I'm very interested in that. And I work closely. I have told our communication expert that I want to be more part of that, and he is happy to hear that.
It's wonderful. Dr. Monteiro, comments on this evaluation?
This master's degree in international communication focuses on what I say the three pillars. One is communication as public diplomacy, and that we through all our courses we tend to stress on that, and they comes through. And then the second pillar of that is communication as international relations, and which is kind of self-evident how it is. And then the third part of that is that you talked about the communication, political economy of media. Very, very important to understand that. And because communication and media is not functioning in a vacuum, but it is kind of makes and creates both politics and economics as well, play a very critical role there. So we need to understand. So those are the three pillars of this master's degree. And I'm glad that our students, become very, get that understanding, get knowledge base, and at the same time, the feedback that we get from our students who graduated, who are in the professional world, they speak very highly about that particular the program that offers them.
Yeah, one more thing that I wanted to say as a takeaway is that it is the field that I am in, which is development. That also is something that we need to know it's not really sustainable. The thing where we need to be, actually, even though I am not there right now, but I take it with me anyway, is in corporate, because that's where the money is, and that's also where the changes can be that are more sustainable for the world. Because as long as the companies can benefit from doing what they're doing, producing plastic or polluting or exploiting and all that, nothing will really change. Even if we have so many nonprofits and so many organizations and we give so much grants, it will still continue. So that was another thing that is a main takeaway from me. And I'm very interested in social businesses and impact investment and those things. I believe in that.
I just want to add, Helen, finance is communication. Money is communication. Remember that.
True, absolutely.
Dear Helen, dear Basilio, dear
First
Secretary Peterson, dear Dr. Monteiro, thank you so very much for this wonderful conversation. And I hope we'll meet again online or in person soon to continue.